I live alone in a brick house in Brooklyn, New York. It is not a large house, not the kind you see on glossy magazine covers or in real estate ads promising luxury and glamour. But it is mine. It has been mine for years, and every creak in the floorboards, every chip in the paint, feels like a secret I share with the walls. The house sits on a narrow street lined with old trees that lean over the road like patient elders, keeping watch as cars slip by. From my front porch, I can just catch a glimpse of the East River, a line of silver that glitters in the morning light and softens into a dark ribbon by nightfall. The front door sticks every winter. When I push it, the wood groans and resists like an old man refusing to get out of bed. The windows let in the draft no matter how much I seal them, and the floors sing when I walk down the hall. Some people might complain about those flaws, but I take comfort in them. They remind me that the house is alive, that it breathes and remembers with me. After all, this house has witnessed my triumphs and my sorrows. It has kept me company in silence when I had no one else to turn to. Most mornings begin the same way. I wake before the sun rises fully and shuffle into the kitchen, where the counters are scratched but sturdy, and the cupboards still carry the faint smell of the pine wood they were built from. I make coffee in a chipped blue mug I bought in a thrift shop years ago. That mug has followed me through boardrooms in Manhattan, through flights to London, through quiet evenings spent with books by the fire. Now it rests in my hands every morning like an old friend. I stand by the window and sip slowly, watching the city wake up. The distant horns of cars mix with the cries of gulls, and the river seems to sigh along with me. On one wall of the living room hangs a simple map. It is not ornate or rare, just a faded print I bought from a shop in Boston. Across it are printed two words: America and Europe. I hung it there to remind myself of the worlds I straddle. My life has stretched across oceans, my investments scattered like seeds in both lands, growing in ways people rarely notice. When I glance at that map, I see not just geography, but a record of where my money works, where my name sits quietly behind companies and projects. It is a map of my reach, though no one on this street would ever guess. My name is Rebecca Morgan. To the people who live near me, I am simply the woman with the gray coat and the soft shoes. They see me walk to the small market down the block, carrying a paper bag with apples or bread, and they nod politely. They don't know the balance sheets I review late at night, or the boardrooms that grow silent when I walk in. They don't need to. I prefer it this way. I have learned that real power is not in being seen, but in choosing when and how to be seen. Silence suits me. Quiet allows me to choose my words carefully, to hold my secrets close. If someone mistakes my quiet nature for weakness, that is their mistake to bear, not mine. Over the years, I have discovered that nothing unsettles people more than realizing they underestimated you. One morning, as I stood with my coffee and watched the winter sun climb slowly over the rooftops, my phone buzzed. It was a message, a simple one-line note from an old friend who still kept in touch with my family. My brother, Brian, was getting married in Manhattan. The date was set, the invitation sent, the flowers chosen. But there was no envelope for me. I was not invited. At first, I simply stared at the message. It was not a surprise, not really. Brian and I had not spoken in years. Time and distance had stretched between us like an invisible wall, growing higher and stronger until neither of us could see the other clearly anymore. But still, a part of me had hoped. A part of me had thought that family ties, no matter how frayed, would hold enough weight to pull me into that day. Instead, I was left outside, not even a thought in the plans of my own brother. The memory of our childhood came rushing back, unbidden. We grew up in Ohio, in a small house that seemed too small for the dreams we had. Brian was older by 3 years, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him something. I admired him once. I admired the way he would sit at our shared desk with sheets of notebook paper spread out, sketching cars he swore he would build one day. He would tell me about the life we'd have, fast cars, big houses, important names. And I believed him. I believed in him. Back then, he was my protector, the one who stood up for me when I was too shy to raise my voice. But time changes people. Money changes them even more. As I stood in my kitchen, the chipped mug warm in my hands, I thought about those days. I thought about the promises we made when we were just children staring at a world too big for us. Then I thought about the man who now planned a wedding without me, who saw no place for me at his table. I set the mug down on the counter and walked into the living room.
My eyes fell on the map.
America and Europe. The words seemed sharper than usual, like guards standing at a gate, demanding a choice. Which world did I belong to now? The one of the family that had pushed me away, or the one I had built with my own hands, with my own dollars, until it stood taller than anything I had once dreamed? The answer came quietly, like a whisper in my chest. I belonged to myself. I belonged to the life I had carved, to the empire no one saw, to the billions that moved silently under my name. I did not need Brian's invitation. I did not need his approval. But I needed something else, closure perhaps. Or maybe just the chance to stand in front of him and let him see the truth of who I had become. I breathed in deeply and let the air fill me with calm. I will go, I said aloud, the words steady and sure. My voice echoed against the walls of my little brick house, as if the house itself agreed with me, and in that moment, I knew the quiet life I had built was about to collide with the noisy one my brother lived. The house creaked as I walked back to the kitchen, as if it too was preparing for what was to come. The hotel in Manhattan stood like a tower of glass and steel, its polished walls reflecting the evening lights of the city. I had seen many such buildings before, but that night it seemed to glisten with a kind of arrogance. The revolving doors turned smoothly as limousines pulled up to the curb. Guests in glittering dresses and tailored suits stepped out, laughing as if the night were theirs alone. I walked up quietly, wrapped in my gray coat, and paused at the threshold. A man in a dark uniform guarded the door. His eyes flicked over me from head to toe, landing on my simple shoes and the worn hem of my coat. He did not ask my name, nor did he greet me. Instead, he frowned, his lips pressed into a line that said more than words could. In his mind, I did not belong. I could have told him my name, told him the companies that rose and fell with a single call for me, told him the billions tied to my signature. But I did not. I stepped forward, letting the door spin around me, carrying me into the bright hall. Inside, the air smelled of roses and expensive wine. Golden light poured from chandeliers, casting every surface in a glow meant to impress. The band played a soft tune, a mix of strings and piano, and the notes floated over the hum of voices. Laughter bubbled near the bar, where men and women clinked glasses filled with champagne. I moved slowly across the floor, my steps echoing against marble tiles polished until they gleamed like mirrors. And then I saw him, Brian, my brother. He stood tall in a black suit, his tie fixed perfectly, his hair neat in a way he never managed as a boy. At his side was Emily, his bride, wrapped in white lace that sparkled under the lights. For a moment, I almost forgot the years between us, almost saw the boy who once sketched dreams on paper. But the man before me was not the boy I remembered. His eyes found mine. For an instant, confusion crossed his face, like a shadow quickly erased. Then it hardened. His lips curved into something sharp, a sneer that cut across the room. He walked toward me, each step heavy, deliberate. The crowd parted slightly, curious to see what would unfold. I stood still, my heart steady, my face calm. Before I could open my mouth, he lifted a crystal glass from a nearby table. Clear water shimmered inside, catching the light like a diamond. With one swift motion, he threw it in my face. The cold struck me like ice, running down my skin, soaking the fabric of my coat. Gasps rippled through the hall. A few whispers followed, quick and cruel, and somewhere in the crowd a laugh broke free. "The poor are forbidden to enter here. Get out of here," Brian said, his voice low but sharp enough to carry. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. I did not move. Water slid down my cheeks, dripping from my chin. I felt it trace my skin, a thin reminder of the moment. Around me, people watched with guarded eyes, some curious, some amused. No one stepped forward. To them, I was nothing more than an intruder, an employee who had wandered where she did not belong. Not one of them spoke my name. I let my gaze sweep the room. Near the stage stood members of Brian's company, the men and women in their polished suits, holding glasses of wine but not drinking. They had met me before, though only in passing, and perhaps none of them remembered. Or perhaps they remembered too well and feared what speaking might cost them. Their eyes slid away from mine, down to the floor or toward the far walls. Not one dared to meet my gaze. The anger rose in me then, old and familiar, the kind that burns the chest and blurs the edges of the world. It came from the same place it always had, from the memory of being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. But with it came something else. Control. I had learned long ago that anger left unchecked was a weapon that cut its wielder as much as its target. So, I let the fire burn quietly inside me, warming me instead of consuming me. "Hello, Brian," I said, my voice soft, steady. "Congratulations." His sneer deepened, as if my calm only fed his disdain. He rolled his eyes and turned his head, speaking not to me but to the guards near the door. "Security." The word rang out like a command, crisp and impatient. The guards began to move, their heavy shoes striking the floor in rhythm. My eyes stayed on Brian. I could see the pride in his posture, the satisfaction in his stance, as though he believed he had triumphed. He thought he had drawn a line, marked the boundaries of his new world, and thrown me out of it forever. But he did not know me. He did not know what I had built in silence, what walls I had torn down, and what towers I had raised. He thought I was a shadow, a mistake that had wandered in. He thought I was poor. As the guards came closer, I felt the weight of every eye in the room. I felt the silence swell, pressing against me, waiting to see if I would shrink, if I would beg, if I would flee. Instead, I stood taller. The water cooled against my skin, but my voice remained calm. I spoke again, not to the guards, not to the crowd, but to Brian alone. "Do you know who you are speaking to, brother?" For the first time, a flicker crossed his face, quick and uncertain. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same cold pride. He said nothing, only waved his hand as the guards stepped closer. And in that moment, as the hall held its breath, I knew this was not the end. It was only the door to something greater. The guards were only a few steps away, their dark suits moving like shadows across the polished floor, when a figure suddenly cut between us. She wore a silver dress that shimmered under the lights, catching every eye in the room. Her presence was sharp, deliberate, and she held herself with a kind of authority that made even the band pause mid-note. "Stop." Her voice rang out, low, clear, and commanding. The guards halted instantly, unsure whether to follow Brian's order or hers. Silence swept the hall, as though the music and chatter had been swallowed whole. I recognized her before Brian did. Julia Reed, chief executive of my brother's company, and one of the few people who had seen me not as a shadow, but as the quiet force behind their empire. We had met only twice. Once in New York, in a private office where the blinds had been drawn against the city lights, and once in London, in a boardroom that smelled of ink and ambition. In both moments, she had looked at me not as a ghost, but as the one who held the strings. She knew my face. She knew my silence. And now she stood between me and my brother, her silver dress gleaming like armor. "Shut your mouth, Brian," Julia said, her voice firm enough to still the whispers. "She is our biggest investor." The words cracked through the room like glass shattering. Heads turned sharply, conversations froze mid-breath, and even Emily's hands dropped, her bouquet of white roses hanging limp at her side. The guards looked from Julia to Brian, then back to me, their steps faltering. Brian blinked, as if the meaning of her words took time to pierce the wall of his arrogance. "What?" Julia's gaze did not leave his face. She pointed lightly, almost casually, in my direction. "Rebecca holds more than 60% of our voting shares. If she pulls her money, the company collapses. We both know the truth. You've just closed a new funding round. Every penny of it leans on her decision. Without her, the lights go out, the doors close, and you're left with nothing but debts. Do you understand?" The crowd murmured, a soft tide of disbelief. Faces I recognized from annual meetings and distant conferences stared at me with wide eyes, suddenly recalculating who I was, suddenly realizing how wrong their assumptions had been. The poor intruder, the outcast at the wedding, had just been named the owner of their future. I didn't need Julia to rattle off numbers. I knew them better than anyone. My empire stretched quietly across industries, spread like roots beneath the surface. $15 billion, an amount most people could not imagine, anchored in energy projects, housing developments, and medical research. In America, I had poured money into green energy plants that powered thousands of homes. In Europe, my funds underwrote hospitals in Edinburgh and small startups in Dublin that watched markets while New York slept. Pounds and dollars, clean and simple, were the lifeblood of everything I touched. Most people never knew, and that was how I preferred it. I was a silent partner, a shadow on the ledger. But here, under the golden lights of a Manhattan ballroom, my shadow stretched long enough to darken every glass of champagne in the room. Brian's face drained of color. The arrogance that had burned so brightly in his eyes moments ago flickered, faltered, and collapsed into shock. He looked down at the glass in his hand as though it had betrayed him, then at the water dripping from my coat. His mouth opened, then closed again. "Rebecca." His voice cracked. I tilted my head, not unkindly. "You thought I was staff," I said softly. "You thought I was poor." The words were not meant to wound. They were simply the truth. But truth has a way of cutting deeper than cruelty. Brian swallowed hard, his lips trembling. "I'm sorry," he whispered, barely audible. For the first time in years, I saw not the man in a tailored suit, not the proud host of a grand wedding, but the boy who once drew cars for me on scraps of paper. The boy who promised that one day we would both live in houses with wide windows and endless light. For a moment, I almost felt the weight of that old love, the bond of childhood that had carried us through poverty and dreams. But the present stood firmly between us, demanding to be heard. The room was still watching. Every guest, every investor, every employee. Emily stared at me with a face caught between fear and curiosity, clutching her bouquet as if it might anchor her. The silence stretched like glass, fragile and ready to break. Julia stepped closer to me, her hand brushing lightly against my shoulder. The gesture was small, almost hidden, but I understood it. She had done her part. She had spoken the truth that needed to be spoken, and now the weight of choice rested on me. Brian's apology hung in the air, thin and trembling. He wanted me to say it was enough, that forgiveness would close the wound he had opened. But forgiveness is not a ribbon you tie around an insult and call it a gift. Forgiveness is a decision, and not one given lightly. I let the silence linger, let him feel the weight of what he had done, of what he had nearly lost. The crowd shifted uneasily, unsure whether to breathe, and then I spoke. "Brian," I said, steady and calm, "you are my brother, and for that, I forgive you. But forgiveness does not mean return. I will not erase what you have shown me tonight." His face twisted with regret, but he said nothing. His bride clutched his arm tighter, her eyes darting nervously between us. I turned my gaze toward Julia, who nodded once, respectful and sure. She knew the truth as well as I did. Some bonds can be mended, and others must be left broken. Tonight, I had been reminded of which kindness was, and so, in that glittering hall, soaked still from the water of my brother's contempt, I chose to stand as I always had, quiet, steady, and unshaken. The reveal was complete. The truth lay open for all to see. But the power of truth is not in the revelation itself. It is in what comes after. For a long moment after Julia's words, the ballroom stood frozen. It felt as if the chandeliers themselves had stopped glowing, waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to decide. I had never liked being the center of attention. My strength had always come from working in silence, moving money where it was needed, letting others take the stage while I held the power in the shadows. But now the light was on me, and my brother, my own blood, was standing in it as if the ground beneath him had given way. I looked at Brian, at his wide eyes and trembling lips. In that instant, I understood the full weight of what I could do. If I pulled my money, the company would fold. The offices in Chicago would lock their doors, leaving hundreds without jobs. Families in Boston would stare at empty dinner tables. Teams in San Francisco who had built their lives around this company would suddenly be out in the cold. My power was absolute, and Brian knew it. That knowledge hollowed him out where he stood. But I also knew something else. Vengeance is a poor use of wealth. If I used my billions to crush him, it would be a blow not just to his pride, but to countless innocent people who had nothing to do with his cruelty. His mistake was his own. I would not let others pay the price for his arrogance. I turned to the band, who had been waiting, instruments poised in nervous silence. I raised my hand lightly. "Play," I said. The music returned in a soft wave, spilling across the room as if nothing had happened. The guests shifted uneasily, caught between shame and relief, their conversations beginning again in hushed tones. I faced Brian once more. "I forgive you," I said, my voice carrying without anger, steady as a stone in water. "But forgiveness does not mean return." He swallowed, desperate now, his pride stripped bare. "Please." "No," I cut him off gently but firmly, shaking my head. "I will not take back my dollars today. Your people will keep their work. The doors of your company will stay open. But you and I are done. No more calls, no more holidays, no more doors to slam in my face, and no more doors for me to open for you." His shoulders sagged as if I had struck him harder than I ever could with money. Emily stepped forward, her hand tightening around his arm. Her face was pale, but there was a kind of softness in her eyes, as if she understood something he did not yet grasp. I hoped she would be kind to him. I hoped he would learn. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the hall. The marble floor echoed under my steps, and though I could feel every gaze following me, I never looked back. The great glass doors opened before me, and the cool night air of Manhattan washed over me like a blessing. A driver, standing by one of the black cars lined up at the curb, stepped toward me. "Do you need a ride, ma'am?" he asked. "Yes," I replied simply. "Brooklyn." As the car pulled away from the glowing hotel, I leaned back against the seat, watching the city lights flicker past. Manhattan shone with its towers of wealth and pride, but across the river, Brooklyn waited for me. The quiet streets, the modest house, the chipped blue mug that had held me through mornings of solitude. That was my true home. On the way, I pulled out my phone and sent a message to my office. "Set aside £2 million, I wrote. "Scholarship fund. America only. For young women who are told. Not allowed. The door will open for them. Simple forms. Plain words. No barriers." The message was sent with a soft chime. I closed the phone and rested it in my lap. That decision brought me more peace than any act of revenge could. I could not erase Brian's cruelty, but I could turn the sting of his insult into an open door for others. That was the kind of power worth keeping. When I arrived at my house, the driver helped me out. I thanked him quietly and walked up the familiar steps. The door stuck as it always did, and I pushed it open with the same firm hand. Inside, the warmth wrapped around me like an embrace. I hung up my gray coat on its hook, its fabric still faintly damp from the water. The wooden floors sang under my steps as I walked to the kitchen. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and waited for the whistle. The small rituals of my home steadied me. Here, there were no chandeliers, no polished marble, no crowds waiting for my decision. Here, there was only me, the hum of the kettle, and the map on the wall. I poured hot water over a bag of tea, letting the steam rise and warm my face. Carrying the mug, I walked into the living room and stood before the map again. America and Europe. 2 words. 2 worlds. They had been the landscape of my empire, the stage for every choice I had made. But standing there, I realized something important. I owned companies, yes. I owned billions in dollars and pounds. But more than that, I owned my choice. I could choose to forgive without returning. I could choose to protect the innocent even when I had been wronged. I could choose peace over revenge, silence over spectacle, solitude over false family. That was the freedom my wealth had bought me. Not luxury, not endless power, but the ability to walk away without fear. I sat down on the old sofa, sipping the tea. The water from Brian's glass was gone from my skin now, replaced by the warmth of my own choosing. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes not from victory, but from clarity. In this house, I choose who I am. In this country, I choose what I keep and what I let go. And tonight, I had chosen to keep my power and let my brother go. The floor creaked softly, as if the house itself approved. The night outside was quiet, and so was I.